The Dark Knight, the Caped Crusader, Batman. Arguably the most famous and influential character of all time. Debuting in 1939, created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, but mostly Bill Finger, he has appeared in over 8,436 comics, dozen or so TV shows, a couple of video games, toys, cups, lunchboxes, hats, t-shirts, underwear, lamps, and of course, for the purpose of this video, many movies. Today I will be looking at and ranking every theatrical Batman film. This means I won't be looking at any of the direct DVD or video films, and I have removed the Batman serials from the 1940s since they were released separately and serials are in this weird in-between spots of whether they are films or not, and I see them as their own thing. But if you were the world's biggest Batman serials from the 1940s fan, leave a comment and maybe I'll make a video about them separately. There is a lot of movies, so let's just get into it with For some context on this film's creation, in 1954, psychiatrist Frederick Wertham wrote The Seduction of the Innocents, which said that comics are too violent and sex-filled and Batman and Robin are making kids gay. And in turn, the Comics Code Authority came in. So Batman comics, which in the 30s and 40s tackled death, terrorism, and lots of other stuff, become much more tame. Suddenly the Joker went from poisoning the water supply in Gotham to having a laughing competition with Robin, and from this tame, campy, kid-friendly era of Batman comics spawned the Adam West and Burt Ward Batman show, where Batman and Robin did
Out of my way, I said! I've gotta go after Robin!
Hand me the key, Batman. I'm afraid you're in no condition to drive.
Yes, of course, officer.
This show had crazy episodes that had dumb 60s comic stuff, like Joker filling a vending machine with money, and for some reason this is like a serious crime that Batman has to investigate. Anyway, Batman Season 1 was such a success that in between Seasons 1 and 2, they rushed out a full feature film to get in on the trend before it was over. This film is one of two Batman films that is primarily a comedy.
Alright, everyone, chill.
Maybe three. This film follows Batman and Robin trying to stop Batman's rogues gallery from doing stuff. They kind of have like a million different schemes and you kind of lose track of them. This film definitely feels like a couple episodes of the show sticky taped together with a slightly larger budget. First off, they lure Batman to the ocean to try and save a guy, only for there to be a shark that tries to eat him. Lucky he has that bat shark repellent. Then they trick Bruce Wayne into falling in love with Catwoman in disguise. So they kidnap him and make Batman come rescue him. Penguin then dehydrates and rehydrates his goons in a plan so convoluted that I will not even try to explain it. Then finally the rogues just go and dehydrate all of the world leaders. Then, in a very bleak ending for an otherwise goofy film, Batman and Robin debate the morals of changing the personalities of every world leader to achieve world peace.
With the way the world is and all, don't you think maybe we ought to try to improve those factors? Kind of reshuffle them a little?
No, Robin. No. It's not for mortals like us to tamper with the laws of nature. Indeed, in this very Batcave, you saw a ghastly example of what happens when one tries to do that.
Gosh, yes, Batman. When you put it that way.
Here we go.
But they don't, and the world continues to sink closer to global nuclear war. Anyway, compared to the other films, there's just not a lot to say about this film overall. The best part is by far the Riddler. He creates these insane riddles. Every time Batman and Robin give their absurd answers that just so happen to be right, I burst out laughing.
Could be any one of them, but which one? Which ones?
Pretty fishy what happened to me on that ladder.
You mean, but there's a fish, there could be a penguin.
But wait! It happened at sea. See? Sea for Catwoman.
Yet, that exploding shark was pulling my leg.
The Joker.
It all adds up to a sinister riddle. Riddler. Riddler?
However, most of the jokes in this film are very of the time. Maybe the funniest joke in this film, where I didn't even know if it was meant to be funny, is when Batman says,
I swear by heaven, if you've harmed that girl, I'll kill you all. I'll rend you limb from limb.
Like, if you know anything about Batman, you know he shouldn't say that. Overall, this is a pretty fine film, very different from every other Batman film, so it'll be a bit harder to rank. I'll share the ranking at the end of this video. Now on to some meat and potatoes. After the 60s show ended, Batman went through a lot. The comics code was pretty much abandoned, and Batman slowly started to become darker. The DC Comics universe was reset, and we got comics like The Dark Knight Returns and Year One, where Frank Miller completely reinvented the character for a new generation. But in just a few years, arguably the biggest thing to happen to Batman ever would occur.
You remember that old saying, flying like a bat out of, well, you know the saying. Well, that's the way people are flocking to retail outlets to get their share of Batmania.
Tim Burton released Batman '89, and the entire world was struck by Batmania. Batman was suddenly relaunched in the public's attention, and Batman was everywhere. He became inescapable, and it was all thanks to this movie.
Batman's become hip and cool, and people can come out of the closet and admit that they read Batman, and that comics are in vogue now.
So how is it? Well, let's get on to that. First off, I love the opening of this film. It does a great job at establishing Gotham as a character within itself. This town feels alive, with every street corner hiding secrets and monsters. This is where Burton strives to build the world of Gotham. He truly makes this city feel lived in. We focus on a couple and their kid getting mugged in an alley, very similar to the Batman origin story we're all familiar with. Later, while the crooks count the money on a rooftop, Batman shows up for the first time and immediately strikes fear into the audience's heart. Then you get the scene that defined the character for decades to come.
I'm not going to kill you. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to tell all your friends about me.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
The rest of the movie is fine, but this moment is what cements superhero films as a big player in the film world. Without this, there's no Spider-Man, no Dark Knight, no MCU. This scene is awesome. My one complaint is probably that Batman didn't stop the actual robbery, instead he just found them afterwards and beat them up. Also, you can't talk about this film without talking about Danny Elfman's iconic score that turns this film from okay to a cultural milestone. This is one of the scores that instantly becomes synonymous with the character, being used in the animated series, in the Lego Batman game, and a bunch of other places. It's amazing. Another important part of this film is the Joker. The film probably spends more time focusing on him than Batman, a problem that gets worse in the next film. He starts off as a 2-bit gangster that's kind of just a guy, then Batman throws him into acid and he's the Joker. I do think Nicholson gives a great crazy guy performance in this film.
Remember, you are my number one guy.
But I think compared to other interpretations of this character we've got, he's sort of in the middle. Now, probably the most controversial decision in this film is to make Batman and Joker's origin stories linked. Joker created Batman and Batman created Joker. This is not something from the comics, but I think it makes sense for this film that focuses on these two characters alone. Now, one thing I don't like about this is how Batman kills the Joker at the end of this film. Murdering the Joker literally goes against the whole point of this. It's a cycle of violence that started with a murder, and then Batman only makes things worse when he tried to kill the Joker. Now, he should have learned that murder is not how you defeat someone like the Joker. But he doesn't. He just kills him, which isn't really something Batman does ever in the comics. And also it doesn't work within the context of this Batman story. But here comes another problem, you see. I don't think Tim Burton really got the ideas behind Batman. In fact, I don't think he read many comics at all, and it's not like there were no good Batman comics at this point. As I said earlier, Batman had been taking a far darker turn for a while now, and yet Burton's main draws are from the earlier years of Batman, before the characters had really an established mythos. He does, however, nail how Gotham City should look and feel, to the point where the comics started taking inspiration from this film when it came to the design of Gotham. In fact, I would go as far to say Gotham was given more characterization than Batman. For most of this film, we don't even follow Batman himself. We don't learn about Batman's past while watching it through his eyes. We learn about it through the lens of Vicky Vale, who's one of the worst characters in this film. Not only does her and Bruce not have much chemistry, not only does she have the personality of wet cardboard, but almost half the film is spent on her and this dumb journalist side plot. If I wanted a journalist superhero film, I would watch Spider-Man or Superman. The best scenes are when we actually get to see Batman when he's doing detective work. Him figuring out what products have Joker poison in them is some of the best parts of this film because we actually get to see his intelligence. It's not like the 60s where the solutions are as dumb as the question. This time it's an actually thought out puzzle that's interesting to solve. There has been some debate recently over the 4K transfer of this film compared to the 30mm scan, about how the 4K version takes a lot of the moody shadow away, and I'm going to let you make your own mind up because it's a tricky subject with good points on both sides. But even in its current state, the cinematography is a highlight. Its moody shadow and use of smoke really makes Gotham come alive, while showing Batman as an intimidating figure. Anyway, this film was good. Moving on to the next one. This movie is weird. Very weird.
Naked, sexual charisma.
After Batman 89, the world was thrust into Batmania, and a sequel was almost certain. So just 3 years later, Michael Keaton and Tim Burton geared up to make Batman Returns. So how is it? Well, this film shows Batman going against Catwoman and the Penguin, and Max Schreck, an original character who's just kind of an idiot.
And Bruce Wayne, why are you dressed up like Batman?
Because he is Batman, you moron.
This film revolves mainly around the villains. In fact, Batman is pretty much a side character in this film, while Catwoman is probably more of a main character. Just to start out, I think the performances are definitely the best part, mainly Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman and Danny DeVito's Penguin. This movie mainly focuses on Penguin's mayoral campaign, helped by Shrek, and Catwoman's origin of being murdered by Shrek, and then being resurrected by cats. It's kinda dumb, but so are most of these films' plots. There's this scene towards the end where Penguin is explaining his plan to kidnap every single firstborn son in Gotham, and one of his sewer clown goons is like, "That's dumb," so Penguin just shoots him. It really feels like Burton is just saying, "Yeah, I'm doing my own thing." At the end of the day, this builds on everything that worked in Batman 89 with the aesthetic and also everything that didn't work. Like how Batman wasn't really flushed out at all. In fact, Batman stinks in this film because he's just kind of insane. Like him killing the Joker must have broken his brain because some of the things he does in this movie are worse than what the Penguin and Catwoman do in this movie. At the end of this film, Batman tries to convince Catwoman not to kill Shrek, but like, you just killed a dozen people. Most of them probably aren't as evil as Shrek is. I'm fine with Batman being against revenge and murder. In fact, I would prefer it, but only when he's consistent. Not when he kills everyone when he feels like it. Another part of this film that I'm more mixed on is the more adult areas. Now, I'm not one of those guys that doesn't like it when makers put sex into movies, but this film is different. I don't mind the romantic scenes with Bruce and Selina. In fact, it's some of the best parts. But every time the Penguin interacts with a woman, I don't like it. But I will say, when something dark or gory happens that you wouldn't usually see in a big budget superhero film, it's cool, so it evens out. Most of this film is set at Christmas, which I like. Hopefully they do this again because it's pretty awesome. And Danny Elfman has another great score. I think the aesthetics of this film are better than Batman 89, but they have yet to really flush out this version of the character. But at the moment, he just seems like a nut job. For all the stuff I don't like, I do think I enjoyed this more than 89. I prefer if Burton wanted to do his own thing, he fully did it. And this movie's flaws are also what makes it interesting. It also replaces the boring romance in the last film with a far more interesting one with Selina and Bruce Wayne. Now let's move on to something a bit different. Now this is a Batman movie. So after the Batmania that came after the release of Batman 89, studio executives everywhere were trying to get as much Batman stuff into kids' brains as possible. But a movie can only go so far. So in 1992, Batman the Animated Series was released.
Another television series?
And I should just say that I love this show so much. The animation, voice performances, and characters are amazing. To many people, this is the definitive version of this world. So how does the theatrical spin-off film, released in 1993, hold up? Let's have a look. For starters, this fixes all the problems I had with Returns and 89, not fleshing out the character by giving us a version of this character with clear motivations and consistent morals in half the runtime of those films. This one manages to give us an amazing analysis of Batman and why he does this, while also showing us who he is.
It doesn't mean I don't care anymore. I don't want to let you down, honest, but it just doesn't hurt so bad anymore. You can understand that, can't you? Look, I can give money to the city, they can hire more cops, let someone else take the risk. It's different now. Please, I need it to be different now.
He's conflicted in this film, torn between what he sees as a debt he owes to his parents and his love for Andrea, which is probably the best Batman romance we've seen, and we are probably going to see if I'm going to be honest. Kevin Conroy is by far the best Batman actor, because he has a deep love for this character that shows in his many performances of him. He is vengeance, he is the night, he is Batman. The villains of this film are Joker and the Phantasm, who is a great parallel to Batman and analysis of his morals and lines when it comes to vengeance. While the Joker is good and Mark Hamill is obviously amazing, I do think the Joker's origin they try and squeeze in here is a bit rushed, even compared to 89. But I prefer a passless Joker anyway, so it's probably just me. Also, another thing that I never hear people talk about in relation to this movie is how it's the first film where Batman is put into more conflict with the police. There's a little bit at the beginning of 89, but in pretty much all of these earlier films, the police are just useless. I guess it's just like real life. They just wait around for Batman to fix their problem, while in this film, they're hunting Batman, which is more interesting than him just being a glorified cop. The background for this film and the shows were drawn on black paper rather than the stock standard white to give it more of a moody atmosphere. Also, sometimes the background changes to just a color, like in the old comics, which I really liked. Anyway, I love this movie, even though this was the first time I've ever seen it. So you know when I was talking about Batman Returns, there were some darker elements that I liked and some that were not nice. Well, McDonald's and parents didn't like any of it, and Warner Brothers didn't ask Tim Burton back for the next Batman film, and Michael Keaton didn't return either. So it was a fresh start for our Caped Crusader. New Batman, Val Kilmer, new director, Joel Schumacher, and new villains. This film is pretty decisive among fans for taking a more kid-friendly and campy look at Batman. Joygasm! For the most part. This film has Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face and Jim Carrey as Riddler. They're both pretty crazy and are either the highlight or the worst part, depending on what type of person you are. Also, infamously, they hated each other on set.
You know, the mentor D said, "Oh, Tommy, I hear you're working with Tommy Lee Jones. He's over in the corner having dinner." And I went over and I said, "Oh yeah, great." I went over and I said, "Hey Tommy, how you doing?" Like that, and the blood just drained from his face, like he had been thinking about me 24 hours.
You'd already done the movie.
It was just fucking no. It was before the biggest scene we have together in the movie, and the blood just drained from his face, and he started shaking, and he got up and he went like this. He must have been in mid kill me fantasy or something like that. He was like like this, and he went like to hug me, and he said, "I hate you."
A lot of this film feels like a toy commercial, is the main criticism, as well as leaning into Superman free territory when it comes to being more of a vehicle for a popular comedic actor than a superhero movie. The characters who are introduced in this film are watered down versions of the characters from the comics. Two-Face is arguably the most important origin story of any Batman villain to tell, and yet they skip over it and give that time to the Riddler origin story, which is just a reversed version of Catwoman's origin story. It doesn't help that Two-Face's character is just the Joker, but with coins in the number 2. The film keeps saying he has a split personality, but you don't really see that outside of him eating 2 meals and having 2 girlfriends. I do think there are bones of a really good Batman film here, and a lot of the deleted scenes show this. Most of them are actually better than the film. I also think Val Kilmer is a really good Bruce Wayne. He has a kind demeanor as well as having a pretty clear motivation. I don't like how he just quits, especially at the height of the Riddler and Two-Face's power, and how after he had that whole spiel about not killing Two-Face, he just kills Two-Face. I should probably have to talk about another character in this movie, Robin, who stinks. For starters, he's a fully grown man. Batman adopts this fully grown man. Robin is typically meant to be like 13 because he's meant to remind Batman of his backstory of being a child who lost his parents and felt scared and alone. But it doesn't work when he's a man. Like, yeah, it sucks that his family died, but like, he's a man. I'm sure he'll be fine. It's not like when a child witnesses their parents die and it feels like their whole world is collapsing. It would be like doing a Batman origin, but he's like 20. It just doesn't work. Also, Nicole Kidman is in this film. She's fine. She's not as good as the romance in Returns and Phantasm, but it's better than the one in '89. The score in this film is good, but it's not as good as the Elfman scores. It does make up for that though with Kiss from a Rose by Seal. Batman Forever is a fine Batman film and a pretty good piece of queer cinema. Moving on to this film is bad. The end. I mean, do I really have to say anything else? It's definitely in contention for the worst Batman film. I hadn't really seen this film before, but my thought was, it can't be that bad. It was. This was also the film to make me realize how repetitive these films got. Poison Ivy is just Catwoman. Mr. Freeze is just Two-Face, who's just the Joker. Batgirl is just Robin. Robin is also like 10 times worse here than before. Everything is. This film also highlights how much world building in these films have dropped off. We see like a Mad Max society of biker gangs in this film, just kind of hanging out. I would rather see Batman fight those guys than Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy in this film. Alfred is here, and he has a pretty big role this time, with him dying towards the end of this film.
Rather disappointed at how poorly I have taught you proper housekeeping. And quite well, it seems.
But for this storyline to work, you have to believe the chemistry between Bruce and Alfred. But because no one in this film has chemistry, and this isn't the same actors we've been following for the last 4 films, this scene and storyline doesn't work. George Clooney is very clearly phoning it in every aspect of this performance. He acts like Patrick Bateman more than the Bruce Wayne played by Christian Bale.
My need to engage in homicidal behavior on a massive scale cannot be corrected, but I have no other way to fulfill my needs.
You're inhuman.
No, I'm in touch with humanity. You're not terribly important to me.
Oh, no. No.
He's by far the worst Batman actor of all time. They also ruin Mr. Freeze's character in this film. His whole thing is his devotion to his wife, but he just acts like any other villain. Even when he thinks his wife is dead, he doesn't really react. He just has no reason to keep going on, but yet he doesn't really change. Poison Ivy is here too, but to be honest, I don't have enough energy to tell you every detail wrong with this film, so I'm just going to move on to better Batman films. So after Batman and Robin basically killed Batman on the big screen, a lot of people threw their hat into the ring for a Batman film. They were going to do a 5th film with George Clooney, but after Batman and Robin absolutely bombed, that was never going to happen. Darren Aronofsky was going to make an R-rated Year One with a homeless Batman played by Joaquin Phoenix. There was a Batman Beyond film with Clint Eastwood as Bruce Wayne, and a Batman vs Superman film before Zack Snyder. But all these projects fell apart, and eventually Nolan came in with a very good pitch that ticked all of the executives' boxes, and so came the next era of Batman films. It's pretty crazy that this film is the first fully fledged Batman origin story. Other films had explored parts of the origin story, mostly the death of his parents, but I think this was the first film to really show why he does this.
As a man, I'm flesh and blood. I can be ignored, I can be destroyed, but as a symbol, I can be incorruptible. I can be everlasting.
Saying that, this is still a superhero origin story, and if I'm being honest, I don't love superhero origin stories, because the most boring part of a superhero is the part where they're just a guy. Luckily these days most superhero films get this and either show us an already established superhero or get through it very quickly. And much like most superhero origin stories, pretty much everything from the Bruce Wayne age up to him returning to Gotham is boring. I don't really care about this version of Ra's al Ghul. He's just really dumb. It's also pretty horrific whitewashing. Why is an Irish guy named Ra's al Ghul? It also ignores arguably the two biggest parts of his character, which are him wanting Batman to be his successor and him cheating death. And he's just a ninja who dabbles in genocide. Rachel's also boring. She really doesn't need to be in this movie and could have been replaced with a more interesting love interest. Other than that, this cast is pretty stacked. This is probably where Christian Bale gives his best performance in this trilogy. His Batman voice isn't as goofy as it gets in the later films. There are times when he has a really calm demeanor, similar to Conroy's performance.
Carmine Falcone brings in shipments of drugs every week. Nobody takes him down, why?
And obviously, he nails Bruce Wayne. The scene where he acts like an asshole to get everyone out of his mansion is amazing. Oh, and this Batcave is great. The scene of him accepting the bats is probably the best scene in this movie. It's a great homage to the scene in Year One without recreating it exactly. Scarecrow is also amazing. He's the only reoccurring Batman villain to date, and he's a highlight of all three of these films. He easily has the best line in this film.
The Batman.
Michael Caine is also easily the best Alfred.
Ever see Batman chewing on a little muesli bar, do you?
But probably my favourite performance, excluding the obvious, of this whole trilogy is Gary Oldman as Commissioner Gordon. I know he said he only does these movies for the paycheck, but he really gives it his all in all three of these. I personally think he's the best version of this character we've seen, even though I love Jeffrey Wright in The Batman, and maybe he can take the spot in the future. This film really builds up how he's the only good cop in this city. In fact, this film does a great job at just showing how horrible Gotham is. It really shows us how this city needs a character like Batman. My biggest problem with this film is how Wayne Enterprises is like a military company. They don't outright say it, but a lot of Batman's gadgets were made for the military, and so was that microwave emitter, which really makes me mad. You're telling me that Bruce Wayne, who doesn't use guns and is pretty against murder, is making weapons for the United States military? Sure. This is mostly because of this film's obsession with making everything realistic. Batman can't just make some armor. There needs to be a reason for all of this stuff to exist other than, you know, he just made it. Even Iron Man at least addresses how weapon manufacturers are bad, but this movie purely ignores it. This film is pretty good, but of course it's more like an appetizer compared to. This is like the Batman movie. If you're watching this, this is probably your favorite Batman film. It's the third highest rated film on IMDb and 22nd on Letterboxd. It's one of the most widely acclaimed and talked about films of the 21st century. This is, in the most part, due to the insane performance from Heath Ledger's Joker. This is definitely my favorite interpretation of the character. I literally don't even need to say anything about him because you already know. I've probably seen this film like 20 times now, and I'm constantly quoting all the little lines from this film that make me crack up.
You think you could steal from us and just walk away?
Yeah. This film also does a really good job at taking the aesthetic and themes from great Batman stories without rushing through what made them great. Cough, cough. This also may just be my favorite Hans Zimmer score. It's not as iconic as the Danny Elfman score or as memorable as the Michael Giacchino score. Really, when you look at all the music in these films, I think Batman probably has the best music of any superhero of all time, without really even having a contest. My least favorite part about this film is probably the whole subplot at the end with the phone sonar radar thing. Not only does it open a moral can of worms this film doesn't really have the time to unpack, but also it looks ugly when he goes into sonar mode, and the white eyes just look goofy. And so, I feel like this is the 5th time I said this, but it makes no sense for Batman to kill Two-Face when he went out of his way to save the Joker. He doesn't even try and save Two-Face. If he just tried to save Two-Face only for him to decide his own fate, it would have cemented that the Joker failed to make Batman cross that line. I will reiterate that I don't 100% mind if Batman kills someone, but it needs to make sense within the story, which just so happens to never be the case in any of these films. But overall, the ending for this film is great. The monologue is just peak. It's just too bad it gets ruined by the next film.
I knew Harvey Dent. I was his friend.
I hate this film so much. Out of all the films on this list, this one is probably the one that makes me the most angry. I will confess, I did not binge this film with the rest. I watched this one early this year in a separate Dark Knight trilogy binge that inspired this video, but I could not force myself to watch this film again in 1 year. Let's start with the positives. Some of the spectacles in this film are fun. The only problem with this film is, well, everything else. For starters, this film tries to adapt The Dark Knight Returns, which is one of the most critically acclaimed and thematically in-depth Batman comics of all time. It also throws in Nightfall and No Man's Land. This is nearly 15,000 pages of comics, and none of them are done right. It skips from story to story, half-assing all of them along the way. I feel like Nolan is just using this insane budget he has to get all of these cool action set pieces out of the way, and just threw together some stupid story at the last minute. So what is the story I keep talking about? Well, this film starts with Batman retired. Yep, after the ending of the last film where Gordon literally says,
"So we'll hunt him. Because he can take it."
Well, apparently he couldn't take it anymore because when he gets home he just quits. Apparently that fall that Batman has at the end that he's literally able to sprint away after taking, well, that fall also makes him have to walk with a cane for 8 years. So, if Bruce Wayne was working as Batman for a little over a year in between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, that means Bruce Wayne was Batman for a year, quit, then came back for like a couple weeks, has his back broken, comes back, and then blows up. What a career! Robert Pattinson Batman has been Batman longer than this chump. This film then introduces Catwoman, who's fine. She should have been set up earlier if she was going to be endgame for this Batman, especially since she has to share the love interest screen time with a red herring love interest. Bane is the main villain of this film, and he sucks. The voice is goofy, his backstory is dumb. This film did more damage to Bane as a character than Batman and Robin. I bet you didn't even know Bane was in that film. Both this film and Batman Begins have the problem of having a hugely stupid villain plan and motivation, kind of like the old films. But, while acting like this film is super smart, I think Goyer and Nolan saw how everyone talked about the Joker in The Dark Knight and wanted to have a similar compelling villain with a complicated plot to take down Batman, but failed at making them compelling or smart. A lot of this applies to Talia al Ghul too. Her death is ridiculous. Not only does Batman shoot her with a missile, she then has the worst death scene in any of these films.
It's done.
This film is less serious than Batman 66. Another thing I hate about this film is how it just ruins all the world building of the other two films. 80% of this Batman film is set during the day. In Batman Begins, Gotham was a gritty city. The cops were dirty, the mob owned everything. It was horrible. But in this film, Gotham is clean. The cops are selfless heroes. And all crime is eliminated. Which literally makes the villain's plot stupid because now they have no other reason to destroy the city other than it being built on lies. So I guess genocide then. This film loses all the visual style that made Batman work in the first place. It has truly stupid politics that I don't even want to talk about. I generally could make a video about this film alone. I know hating this film this much is a pretty spicy take, but I believe 90% of the people who say they love this film are just blinded by how good The Dark Knight is, and lie to themselves that this doesn't ruin the trilogy. There is too much dumb, stupid shit in this movie, and I'm just glad Nolan could walk away from this franchise even if he left it in flames.
In the dream, they took me to the light. A beautiful lie.
So in 2013, Man of Steel was released, and the big question on the now MCU-ified general audience is when will we see the big two share a screen? While we wouldn't see Nolan's version of the character, in 2016, Zack Snyder delivered us this film. Finally, we see these two titans of industry team up. Yay! If you were around for this film coming out, you remember the promotion. This film was marketed on every packet of Doritos and every bottle of Gatorade. Everyone was talking about if Batman could really beat Superman in a fight. This led to a great box office for the first weekend. After that, due to bad word of mouth, this film made less than The Dark Knight Rises and The Dark Knight. But were the critics wrong? Was it all a ploy by the Chinese or something to take down the Snyderverse? Let's find out. Now I know this isn't 100% a Batman film, but he's sort of the main character, and he's in the title, so I'm counting it. I also didn't watch the Ultimate Cut. It's probably better, but it wasn't on any streaming services, and I was only watching the theatrical Batman, so it feels wrong to include it. This is the first time me watching this film in like 6-7 years. I didn't like it back then and I don't love it now. I will say it was better than I was expecting, but not by much. I think the Snyder films I've seen are boring, but he's clearly a somewhat competent director. I don't love this Batman or this Superman, and I don't love the Zack Snyderisms that you see throughout all of his films. Mainly the darker color tone, the unnecessary slow motion, and the misunderstanding of the source material. I will say the fights are pretty well done. This film is definitely more well made than your usual Marvel movie on a purely technical level. The montage of Superman saving people is amazing. Almost. Snyder can't help but intercut these dumb news footage of people debating the morals and philosophy of Superman with this dumb dramatic music. Snyder makes it clear he sees Superman as a person above everyone else, much like someone like Homelander sees Homelander. He thinks it's silly to hold Superman accountable because he's better than us. Superman chooses to help humanity not because he's a good person, but because he's a god who blesses us humans with his divine power. He even tells Batman to stop because to a god, a man is merely an ant. Now let's talk about Batman because he's clearly no saint. For example, he's a psychopath. This is like the third time I've said this now. I will say at least this Batman isn't going up to Superman and saying, "You're bad because you kill people." He's just mad because Superman is also a psychopath, but a psychopath with godlike powers. This is a Batman who's been through a lot, and we see him at his worst. The only issue is I don't want to watch a crazy, unstable man-child beef with an unrelatable god for 2 hours. I understand if that's your thing, but it's not mine. This film takes itself way too seriously for a film that's about people in costumes punching each other. Best superhero films strike a chord between the emotionless, edgy, see, superheroes aren't just for kids, and the, yeah, that just happened, Marvel CGI Quip Fest. I think the secret ingredient this film is missing is sincerity, which may just be the thing that makes superheroes work in the first place. Lex Luthor is kind of the main villain of this film, along with this messed up teenage mutant ninja turtle that they call Apocalypse. He's just as bad as everyone says he is. He is the only character in this film to show emotion, but that emotion is just insanity.
Because that is paradoxical, and
Gal Gadot is maybe the worst actress of all time, but Wonder Woman is also the only character in this film who's not a horrible person. Just in this film though, that didn't last long. I also really like the power suit Batman uses in his fight against Superman. I think the white eyes look really good here, and it's a super good take on the one from The Dark Knight Returns. The funniest part of this film is definitely the courtroom. When I first watched this as a kid, I thought Lex Luthor somehow made his urine explosive, and that's why the courtroom blew up. This film surprised me because I expected it to be a bottom 3, but no, it's only a bottom 4.
Get what you fucking deserve!
The Killing Joke was a comic released in the 80s, written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Brian Boland and John Higgins. It's a pretty good comic. It's only about 50 pages long, so I suggest you give it a read. In fact, I read it before I watched this film, and it only took me about 20 minutes. This begs the question, why would you make a movie about it? The answer is, you shouldn't. You know how I said The Dark Knight Rises shoved too much into one movie? Well, this is the opposite, taking what should be like a 40-minute movie max and turning it into an 80-minute long animated film. Now for starters, I don't like this DC animation style. Most of these films look cheap and are just a way to make a quick buck off people who don't like to read. I haven't seen it, but I heard the Red Hood film is good, so I should check that out. This film drains the life out of every panel of Boland and Higgins' work. The colours, the vibrancy, the comic cat are all gone, replaced with a dull corporate style. Then you have the first half, which is an original story made for this film, and it is easily the worst thing I have ever seen related to Batman. It's about a mobster who likes Batgirl, but also Batman and Batgirl have sex on a roof, and also Batgirl has the worst gay best friend trope character I've ever seen. I think Hollywood should just stop trying to adapt Alan Moore stories because it never turns out well.
You see what those bloody corporations do? They take your ideas and they suck them. Suck them like leeches until they've gotten every last drop of the marrow from your bones.
I really can't put into words how bad everything here is. You kind of have to watch it yourself. The second half is slightly better, but once again, just read the fucking comic. The only reason to watch this film is if you hate reading that much, or to hear Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy perform this dialogue. But if you hate reading so much that you're going to spend more time watching a dog shit film than it would take to read the goddamn comic book, I don't think you really care that much. This is probably the worst movie I've watched for this video so far, so moving on.
DC. The house that Batman built. Yeah, what, Superman? Come at me, bro. I'm your kryptonite.
This film is an amazing treat to watch if you watch it after seeing all the films that came before. It pays homage to pretty much every Batman film to come before. The references don't feel like cheap nostalgia though, unlike many multiversal crossovers these days. They're nice little nods for those who took the time to watch all these films and read all the comics. In this film, Batman is pretty much a character made out of everything people think is wrong about him. This means he's a spoiled brat who
unsupervised adult man karate chopping poor people in a Halloween costume.
This kind of annoys me. This is how many people already think about the character, including myself at one point, and this film helped make this a mainstream interpretation. However, it does build on this. By the end, Batman goes through a character arc and learns to care about the people in his life. I do think the relationship between Batman and the Joker was a bit underdeveloped. It would have made more sense if they gave the speech about how much he means to him to Robin at the end of the film. A majority of the film focuses on their relationship, while Batman and Joker barely have any screen time together in the middle. I also think this film has a few pacing issues, but that's fine. For most kids' films built around selling toys, it's pretty good. Speaking of toys, I really like Lego and this movie's animation style. I think this film looks better than the Lego movie, and I wish they made more Lego movies. I know they're making that Pharrell Williams one, but honestly, it doesn't look super good, and I prefer how the older films looked. My favourite part and least favourite part of this film is the villain. I love seeing all the silly, obscure rogues show up, but at the end, when Joker goes to the Phantom Zone, side note, why does the Phantom Zone operator say the Joker isn't evil, as the others, when King Kong is just an animal and the Joker is a serial killing child murderer? He teams up with all the Warner Brother owned villains. This was just cheap reference nostalgia bait, as I mentioned. Also, the fact that Ralph Fiennes is in this movie, and yet they get someone else to play Voldemort is funny. You're telling me he couldn't record a few extra lines? I wish they had the Joker team up with other DC villains instead. It makes sense since we see Zod literally get sent to the Phantom Zone, but I guess the Justice League would have just come. Why didn't they come in the first place though? Are they stupid? Anyway, this is a fine film. I really liked it as a kid, and it's okay as I have grown. Now, we're finally here. The Batman is the best one. Sorry, but it's true. It follows a Batman who's very early in his career. He's darker, more violent, more extreme. He describes himself as vengeance, strikes fear into his enemies, as well as their victims. At the beginning of the film, we see him doubting if he is actually making a difference in Gotham. And to the audience, it's pretty clear he isn't. The Riddler brings the lack of progress, a lack of renewal to light. While Batman takes his anger out on random criminals, the mob, cops, and government were stealing money from people right beneath Bruce Wayne's nose. Batman learns that the influence he was having on Gotham was not a positive one. Instead of inspiring hope, he inspires violence, murderers, and more people take their frustrations out with vengeance. This Batman learns he can't just beat up his problems. He has to save people and inspire hope. The final 20 minutes of this film are probably the best Batman media in any of these films. The final scene in The Dark Knight and the grave scene in Mask of the Phantasm are close behind, but there's something about how people look at Batman here, compared to the beginning, that generally brings a tear to my eye. Bruce Wayne, a boy who had his entire world crumble around him, is now the one to comfort someone going through a similar thing. When I watched this for the first time 2 years ago, I didn't like it very much. Back then I hadn't read many Batman comics, and was dealing with the superhero fatigue that we all went through. But since then, I've rewatched this film twice, and it's gotten a lot better each time. This film was critiqued for borrowing from many David Fincher films. While it clearly is inspired by Seven, Zodiac, and The Game, I think that's just one of the many sources it pulls from. It has references to classic Hitchcock, Kurosawa crime films, 40s noir, Korean action, and much more. The film is very much like Year One, where Batman takes on real, gritty threats, like the mob and corruption. However, I don't think Reeves, who did a great job of directing, is interested in moving on to the threats that a world with Batman would create. We already have a Batman trilogy obsessed with stripping away the fantastical elements of his character. How long can you keep doing a gritty new take on Batman before it gets old? This one gets a pass because we see a Batman who is still learning. This world hasn't really tasted what he's capable of yet, but how long can he shut down the mob before something new tries to stop him? Something playing his game. This film was also really funny. Every line the Penguin says is hilarious.
Holy God, what are you showing me? His head. Come on! Open your eyes!
and I'm really enjoying his own show on HBO Max or Binge here in Australia. Jeffrey Wright is also an amazing Commissioner Gordon. He has a great relationship with Batman. We only really need one scene to understand their dynamic.
No guns. Yeah, man, that's your thing.
Catwoman is one of the best Batman love interests we've seen. My one complaint is that she has no real reason to like him. He's really mean to her and constantly an asshole about everything. The great thing is, though, that Batman learns her perspective, which plays into his character arc of learning empathy. He realizes he's not the only person with a shitty hand. Some people probably had it harder, and he shouldn't just assume all criminals are evil. This film addresses common critiques of Batman while making them a part of his character he must overcome. I love the cinematography by Greg Fraser, the performances, the music by Michael Giacchino. This is just a sublime movie and is the best Batman film of all time. Okay, now for the moment everyone has been waiting for. Here's the final ranking. Drumroll please. Ta-da! Yeah, no surprise, the Batman is the best. The Killing Joke is by far the worst, even though these bottom three are pretty much all on the same level of horribleness, almost. I've got a couple other rankings here I'll show. Here's the love interests. These are kind of, most of them are not very good. Here's the actors. This is like ranking the performances mostly. Conroy is obviously the best. And I put Adam West really high. It's mostly a joke, but like he's just really funny and good. I don't know what I was kind of thinking. Maybe Patterson's probably a bit better, but like I put Adam West high just for shits and giggles. Here are all the Batmen as characters. This is directly ranking like the characters and their stories. I also put Adam West really high on this one. I don't really know why, yet again, but hey, yeah, but Kevin Conroy's Batman is still the GOAT here. I am including alternate media that we see these characters in for this one, specifically because, I mean, come on. Here's the villains. This one is maybe the most controversial one. There's a lot of these. There's a lot of them in F. There's a lot of bad villains. I generally cannot even remember the bad guy from the first half of The Killing Joke, but he is by far the worst. And Heath Ledger's Joker is my favorite, just purely on bias, but like, he did a great job. And then I also put Carmine Falcone, Mark Hamill's Joker, and Paul Dano's Riddler in the S tier. This one also uses alternate media, so that's why Joker's a lot higher than he would be if I was just counting Mask of the Phantasm, and the Penguin too. Penguin's really good in his own show, you guys should watch that show. And now here's onto more of the technical elements. Here's the Bat scores. These may be the best things about these movies. They're all really good, but I think the top three are really just, you know, they're iconic in their own way, and then the next tier is kind of like, yeah, these ones are also really good, and also some of the, you know, really fun scores. B tier is pretty good. C tier is kind of forgettable. D tier, the only reason I put Killing Joke in D tier is because I cannot remember the score from that film. It's not very memorable, but the entire film's not very memorable, so. And finally, the Bat cinematography. All of these films have really good cinematography. Once again, I don't really like Zack Snyder's style, and I feel like there's too much CGI in that film, so that's why Batman vs Superman is so low, even though a lot of people love the cinematography in that film. The Killing Joke's just not very good, especially when you compare it to the comic. The Schumacher films surprisingly look very good if you ignore the Dutch angles. And the Batman is just freaking insane how good that film looks. And that's all the rankings.
So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I spent a lot of time on it. This is the first video I've ever made. Really enjoyed it. Remember that like button and subscribe. I'll probably make a video about the Penguin show when that comes out, but I hope to make videos about more art house films, even though I started off with, you know, doing cape shit, quote unquote. I probably won't make videos exclusively on superhero films or exclusively on Batman. I'll probably cover like a couple, you know, Criterion films, and then when the Oscars get up, maybe cover some Oscar films, and I'll probably make a video at the end of this year doing all my favorite films from this year, ranking them all, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. Here is a blooper reel of me trying to pronounce Ra's al Ghul, version of Ra's as Raz al Ghul.